Okay, hello and welcome to the city's Hurricane Preparedness Outreach event, Are You Ready? This is our third year to have this event, and so we thank y'all for coming out and walking around, getting some information from the vendors, and gathering information on how to prepare for a hurricane, or tornado, or even a flood event. Like I said, this is our third year of having this event. This is our first year to have this event with our new Biloxi Emergency Manager and Fire Deputy Chief Nick Geiser. I'm going to welcome him up. He's going to say a couple words.
Hi, thank y'all. So I just want to welcome everybody here and thank all the vendors and all the different participants and speakers. You know, this is a great event on educating the public and ourselves on, hurricane preparation. So without further ado, again, thank you. I think we're going to start with DMR, Patrick Levine. Thank you.
On behalf of the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, I want to thank the City of Biloxi for allowing us to be a part of this event. Just a great opportunity to notify the public and those in our community of the safety concerns we have in the event of a storm. As we get started, I want to remind everybody, first of all, to heed the warnings of your emergency managers. So many times we take those as suggestions, and thinking about the Department of Marine Resources, the number one cause of death in a storm is rising water. And so don't take those as suggestions when they have those mandatory evacuations, but be sure to heed their warnings and get out. Don't stay in those low-lying areas when a storm's coming. We want to encourage you to have a plan now. Don't start trying to plan whenever a storm enters the Gulf of Mexico, but have a plan where you're going to move that vessel when those mandatory evacuations of harbors and marinas come in. Start thinking now, where am I going to go? Where am I going to tie it up? How am I going to get off of the vessel, get back to where I need to go when I start moving my equipment and my vessels? Provide ample time to move a vessel. I know whenever I was talking to Chief Geiser and Amber about being here today, we mentioned talking about the vessels and marine traffic prior to a storm. And so many times people wait till the last minute to move those vessels. Don't wait till the last minute. Make sure you take care of all that, all your property. If you start to think that there may be an issue here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, go ahead and start prepping that property ahead of time so that you can provide ample time to make sure your family's safe. Prior to moving that vessel, if you decide to stay on the vessel, I want to encourage you to do this. Leave a float plan with the harbor master. Make sure you let somebody know who's going to be staying on that vessel, where that vessel is going to be staged at, who to contact in the event of emergency. And you need to do this. Make sure you have enough food and enough water for a couple weeks. Make sure you have a couple weeks worth of food and water for not only the duration of the storm, but in the event that you're stranded for a few days, you want to make sure you have enough supplies. When we talk about supplies, it's recommended that you bring at least 2 weeks worth of medication. Make sure you have plenty of food, plenty of water, plenty of medication if you're going to be staying on board that vessel. Let somebody know who's going to be on board with you. Make sure you have names, telephone numbers, plenty of contact information. That way emergency officials know who to be looking for and check on immediately after a storm. Whenever you start to move it, okay, be mindful of property owners, and often there's congested boat traffic. So make sure you're safe. I want to remind you, when you're moving that vessel out of the harbor or marina, when you're seeking refuge in safe harbor, you still can be held civilly liable and criminally liable for any damage or harm that's caused from your wake or negligence. So be safe when you're boating and moving that vessel to safe harbor. When anchoring your vessel, do not anchor in navigable channels, and do not put mooring or anchor lines across navigable water. Make sure you leave room. Be courteous of other boaters. Don't block channels when you're anchoring that vessel prior to a storm. And in closing, I want to remind you that life safety is paramount. It's important that you take care of your property ahead of time, safeguard it, provide ample time for you to protect your family. And on behalf of the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, once again, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Patrick will be available, as all the speakers will be, for questions after this whole presentation. Next, we're going to go ahead and welcome up our hurricane hunters. They can come on up and speak. Are they here? Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you. Colonel Robert Stanton with the 403rd Wing, Vice Commander, Keesler Air Force Base. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Rob Stanton. I'm the Vice Commander, 403rd Wing, the Reserve Wing, right over there at Keesler. And our wing has a lot of capability there, about 1,500 folks. We have the Flying Jennies. It's a TAC squadron. Just got back from the AOR. They drop combat. Oh, okay. Oh, of course. Sorry. All right. We have a combat airlift squadron over there. Just got back from the AOR, delivering beans and bullets to the front. And then we also have a flying squadron that you might have heard of, the Hurricane Hunters, also stationed there. And we're very proud of all the missions we have on base. Today I'm going to talk about the Hurricane Hunters. The technology's letting us down a little bit. I got some cool Hollywood videos that aren't going to pull up, so I'm going to do a little tap dance and do my best to tell you what goes into that mission. And I hope if you get anything out of this, it's going to be the resources expended and that the great lengths that are gone, not just with our efforts, but the entire machine, to make sure you get the best information to make your risk management decisions. So Hurricane Hunters, what do they do? A lot of folks say, do they really fly through storms or they fly over them? Yeah, the mission is to fly right through them and drop a little weather instrument, we call it a drop sign, right into the middle of it. In the middle, as well as the max wind bands, which are normally in the eye walls. Fly through, punch this little weather instrument, weighs about a pound, it's biodegradable, has a GPS in it, measures pressure, but it gives us pinpoint data of the storm's intensity and direction as we plot along and fix it. So we're flying through these weather systems to try and get you the best data, to try and get basically the National Hurricane Center and their forecasters the best information possible. All right, so a little bit about how the mission works. You know, I'll take you through it. We get it, or the satellites, a system comes off Africa or maybe the Caribbean or Bay of Campeche, like that last one, where the air masses are heating up. They come over, they drift over the water. There's a natural tendency for those systems, hot, cold, to start spinning a little bit, and then they eventually become a weather system, sometimes with severe intensity and sometimes land-based, you know, to where it becomes a factor for us. So how our life works, starting about this time of year, we've already had a couple, is we'll get a phone call, or a system is looked at, a system of interest will be found, satellite. National Hurricane Center's got the eye in the sky and is constantly looking for this. We'll get a call. If it's in the initial stages, what we do is a low-level invest. We'll fly 500 feet to see this tropical wave, right? It hasn't turned yet. It's a wave. To see, we'll go eyeballs out the window to see if there's circulation in that system and see if it closes off and becomes a tropical storm. At that point, we start fixing it to find out where it's heading and what the severity, intensity is of that system. So it starts off as low-level invest, works its way into a fix mission. Once we're in the fix stage, again, punching weather instruments through there, that information comes back up to the airplane. It's QC'd a little bit, quality controlled, to make sure the data is good. If it's not, we come back around and punch another one through and get that information and beam it via satellite directly to the National Hurricane Center. They take it, it's called burst data, they take that information, it's not manipulated at all, it's taken right from the system and plugged right into the forecast models. Some of you probably, I'm sure most folks that live on the coast watch the Weather Channel a bunch. You'll see the guys in the starch white shirts starting to talk about the weather system inbound, what it's doing, and you'll see a bunch of what we call spaghetti models, right? These bunch of lines coming at you. I think we're up to about 16 models, the Canadian model, the GFL. You know, you'll hear Jim Cantori pick his favorite model and why this one's going this way and why this one here. But the central amount of models are telling us going here. So what happens is you'll see that next time, do this. Watch those models, spaghetti models, be presented, and you'll see they're all over the place, and a couple outliers that are just completely out to lunch. As we fly through those storms and collect data and pump it right into the models, you'll see those things start tightening up to a point where the Hurricane Center can build a more accurate 5-day and 3-day model out of those things. So that's kind of the game, is to try and help with that forecasting and try and make it better. And there's a lot of work done in this. I wish for those that have an interest in severe weather, I think a lot of us naturally do living here. There's a debrief, a big debrief we call it. At the end of the season, it's called the Interdepartmental Hurricane Conference, in which there's thousands of scientists all in a room beating themselves up about why the models thought it was going to curve here, but the storm actually curved the other way. And it's the science involved in this is just unbelievable, and the amount of interest and effort that goes into that. So what I would like to convey to you is a lot of folks are interested. They're working very hard. They're trying their best to give you that best 5-day and 3-day. Take heed. And for our end of it, we're a little bit on the Hollywood side. But the real heroes are the first responders, the emergency managers, city planners, everybody doing the real work to set up a city for an inbound system. But we're glad to be part of that overall machine that's doing its best to get you the right information. So I'll tell you, from us, our guys love the mission. We can't imagine doing anything else. We have the best retention rate because there's something about us that likes to, go do something and see the immediate results on TV as you come back as those models tighten up. So our folks love to do it, but we spend a lot of gas and resources, and I can't even get into how much maintenance goes into keeping 10 airplanes ready for a phone call and 16 hours later out the door. Part of the brief I left off is our forward operating location a lot of times is St. Croix. As we watch them coming off Cape Verde, off of Africa, and working its way towards the U.S. So a lot of times the scenario is phone call. Sometimes maybe it's already formed up into a system. Launch 3 planes, 60 people out the next day, St. Croix, and start hitting it around the clock. So it's very busy. Even on years where there's not a lot of land falling, there's a lot of what we call fish killers, where they generate and just kind of bend up back towards Europe. But those still can be busy years for us because we spend a lot of gas, money, and time and resources. But our folks can't imagine doing anything else. And we're glad to provide that service. And I want to, with my closing remarks, thank what I consider the real heroes, you folks on the ground, the first responders, and everybody has the plan and put everything together when there's one inbound. But we're glad to do our part, and like I said, I'll stick around for questions, and thanks for the privilege to tell you a little bit about what we do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Stanton. Now we're going to have Dr. Hal Needham come up and talk about historic weather height observation data. You can come on up. Thank you so much.
Okay, fantastic. Good morning, everybody. Great to be here. My name is Dr. Hal Needham. I want to introduce 2 of my colleagues, Stuart Clark and Carl Schneider. Both came over from Alabama. This morning we work on a lot of projects together. So, 50 years ago, this first slide shows that 50 years ago, the Mississippi coast was decimated by Hurricane Camille. So Camille pushed a 24.5-foot wall of water into coastal Mississippi, and we can see here. Is that coming up? Okay. This is the Richelieu apartment complex in Pass Christian area. So you can see before on top and after on the bottom. This is the power of water moving across the landscape. And coastal Mississippi has had a lot of really massive storm surge events. So in a storm surge event, a hurricane pushes these really strong onshore winds, and actually the sea level can rise as high as 20, 25, 30 feet above where it normally is, and just really decimate the landscape. Next slide, please. Today I'm going to be talking about in 2008 when I moved to the Gulf Coast. There was really no historic storm surge database, and I was really curious why that was. So this next slide shows that I started looking through historic flood data, basically going to libraries, looking online, and I found that there were data everywhere. They were just very scattered. So we have, and you can go back to the previous one. So I can speak loudly enough. There are tide gauges. We have National Hurricane Center reports since 1958. we have a lot of maps of historic hurricanes that have struck the Gulf Coast. Actually, zooming in on that map on this next slide, this is a map of what we sometimes call the Forgotten Hurricane of 1915. This was a major hurricane that struck the New Orleans area. Everything shaded here in gray was inundated by salt water. You may not be able to see it from where you're sitting, but there are a lot of high water marks on this map. So this is 1915, 104 years ago. They didn't have internet or cell phones, but they had rulers, tape measures, and pencils and pens. And they went out and recorded these data, but these data were just in the back of libraries and archives. They were not brought into the modern day. And so what I began to see is we could actually go back to these historic maps, see what happened, and bring that into the future. This next slide goes back to where we were talking about newspapers are a very important resource going back especially to the early 1900s. I just met Jane from Biloxi Library. If you haven't checked out her table, please check it out. She has a lot of newspaper clippings, historic photos. We see high water marks from a lot of communities. Historic photos. This is Miami in 1926. So we can actually go back, and there's a tremendous history of saltwater flooding along the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast, and often working with librarians, historians, digging into the archives, we begin to see a history of what's happened in any one location. So what I began to see when I started looking into the idea of building a historic database, my conclusion is that we have plenty of observations to do this, but I thought this project could end up really big, and if you have a big project, you need a good acronym. So, you know, when I started thinking of an acronym for this project, I kept coming up with this idea of water height observation data. And so the only problem with that, if you want to turn this into an acronym, pretty much what you end up with on this next slide is WHODAT. So I thought I'm going to do maybe the water height observation database. But the problem is it would come up with WHODAT, but I didn't see that as a problem because our initial funding for my doctoral research at LSU was from the federal government. And every year we had to turn in an annual report. And I thought, you know, this next slide shows what I can put on this report. I can say, you know, they're going to look at this stuff and say, we don't really know what's going on there down in the Gulf Coast. We're up in Washington, D.C., but people love this water height observation data project. Just everywhere you go, people are chanting WHODAT. They love this stuff. We'll just keep sending millions of dollars. That was kind of my initial research plan. Do the WHODAT project and it'll go big. We didn't end up calling it WHODAT. We ended up calling it SurgeDat. And this next slide shows an initial snapshot of what we found. This is the highest watermark from about 200 hurricanes and tropical storms from 1880 to present. Every dot on this map is the location and height of a peak water level. And what we see here is there's actually a pattern to it, right? So the larger, darker circles are higher magnitude events. So we see a lot of red and purple really along the northern and western Gulf Coast and then the Florida Keys. Well, look at the west coast of Florida. You don't see any red or purple. It doesn't mean that we couldn't get a 20-foot storm surge in Tampa Bay, but it just shows that that's a lot less likely than getting a 20-foot storm surge in the Galveston area. So incidentally, the two highest watermarks I found since 1880 were both here in Mississippi, from Hurricane Camille and Hurricane Katrina. And I actually thought at first, what a coincidence, that's the same spot would get the two highest watermarks. I began to see after some time it actually was not a coincidence, and really there's a reason for it. The one limitation of this is that every storm, it just shows up as one dot on the map. But we know if you've lived along the Gulf Coast, these hurricanes can inundate hundreds of miles of coastline with salt water. And so what I started doing in 2012 was building these whole envelopes of water. This next slide shows Hurricane Katrina in 2005. So everywhere you see in black there got over 16 feet of salt water. And we even see some red there, 12 to 16 feet, even moving over through Alabama. Stuart Clark will tell you all about the experience of his family's home there in Dauphin Island. So really starting to do this and getting the whole envelopes, we could actually take any location along the coast and start to build an entire history of what's happened there. And this next slide shows what we've been doing with the USurge project. The following slide shows you that this is a history that we built for Pensacola, Florida. So this is going from 1880 to present for Pensacola. This is sea level, which is rising over time. And mostly what we see here is these low magnitude events with 2 or 3 or 4 feet of salt water. Most of these events are really low, either from a powerful hurricane that hit far away or a weaker hurricane nearby. But through history, we see 3 times, 1906, 1926, and Hurricane Ivan in 2004, where we had a powerful hurricane hit at just the wrong spot for Pensacola. And what we see here in many of these communities is that there will be 2 or 3 historic hurricanes that produce tremendous amounts of salt water that's much higher than everything else. But look at this more closely. You get people say, well, I've lived here for 50 years. They came in maybe 1969, And as far as really high events in a place like Pensacola, they're only going to remember Ivan. They're going to think that was a million-year storm. Nothing was ever like Ivan. It was so much higher. But if you look back far enough into the 20s, turn of the century, you start to see actually there wasn't one Ivan, there were three. And so a place like Mississippi coast, Katrina is more recent, but you know, it's great to see this place here doing a 50-year anniversary for Camille, because Katrina was higher than Camille, but same ballpark. They both were putting between 25 and 30 feet of salt water here. So we really need to understand the deeper history for these communities to understand our risk. The next slide goes into FEMA's base flood elevation for a place like Pensacola, 7 feet. So once you understand the history, you say, why in the world are we telling people to build at 7 feet and calling this a 100-year water level when it's been exceeded more than 2 to 3 feet 3 times in history? This is common for most Gulf Coast communities. I've found that the base flood elevation that we require people to build to has been exceeded multiple times by multiple feet. The next slide gets into some of this work I've done globally, looking at storm surges all around the world. I actually built the first global storm surge database, looking at 6 ocean basins. And actually in the Western Hemisphere, we have Western North Atlantic and the Eastern Pacific, and the higher storm surges actually happen in the Western North Atlantic. Globally, the highest surges in the world happen in the Northern Indian Ocean, and number 2 in the world is actually right here along the Mississippi coast. So we have a big vulnerability to this hazard. This next slide goes into basically time from 1880 to present. We have 4 ocean basins, and really the highest one is the Northern Indian Ocean. We have this cluster here of really like 8 Katrinas in about 15 years in Bangladesh and India, which was the most horrific time in the history of the world. But the big picture to focus on, if you're in the Western Hemisphere, you're green, and the 2 highest high water marks were Camille and Katrina. Again, talking about the U.S., the entire Western North Atlantic, the highest events we've ever seen on record are right here in Mississippi. The next slide gets into understanding why is that? Is that just random, or is there a reason to it? There are really 5 variables that affect storm surge height. One is the hurricane size. So we often hear about this category number, but the category number just has to do with the sustained winds. The geographic size of a Katrina or an Ike are really large storms that push a lot of salt water. The next slide gets into the hurricane forward speed. So look at the picture from this next slide here. This is Hurricane Isaac. Anyone remember that from 2012? It was a category 1, but just parked for a few days, and actually it was large and it didn't move, and it was able to push more than 11 feet of salt water into parts of Mississippi. So a low category storm, quote unquote, but did a lot of flooding. Here's a picture from Long Beach, Mississippi. The next slide gets into looking at offshore bathymetry. So that's a fancy scientific word for basically topography offshore. How deep is your water offshore? And it's counterintuitive. Actually, the more shallow your water is, the higher the storm surge. And this graphic here shows you really, how many of you have ever been to a volcanic island, like Hawaii, places in the Caribbean? How far do you have to walk offshore to get over your head in water? Not very far. The water gets really deep, really quick, and so the hurricane pushes in, and this is the storm surge, how high your sea level is rising. Not very much if you're in a place like Hawaii, but look at these huge surf, these huge waves that you can surf on, or you wouldn't in a storm, but that type of wave are tremendous. So compare that with a place like Mississippi on this next slide. Very shallow. How far do you have to walk out here to get over your head in water? You have to walk quite a distance, right? It's very shallow. And this hurricane pushes in all this water. It doesn't have anywhere to redistribute the current, so the storm surge is enormous. But the waves the kind that surfers ride, they're actually not as big as a place like Hawaii. But you get this enormous storm surge that goes in really far. Look at this bathymetric map of the eastern Gulf Coast. And actually, these areas here that are really white, the very shallow areas, you can go 40, 50 miles south of here, and it's extremely shallow. You have very shallow water offshore. Compare that to a place like Fort Lauderdale. So what I'm saying here is if a Hurricane Katrina hit Fort Lauderdale, you're not going to get a 28-foot storm surge. You might get a 14-foot storm surge. So you move these storms around, and the amount of salt water is very different, and that really has a lot to do with why we're so vulnerable here in Mississippi. This next slide gets into one more thing, the coastal shape. Look at this map here of Hurricane Katrina. You can see the counterclockwise rotation. Look at the coast in the northern Gulf Coast. We kind of have this right angle. So the Mississippi River Delta of Louisiana sticks out, and so really we get these prolonged easterly winds as a hurricane's approaching, and this water will just pile up here. It just gets really piling up there along the right angle, and that's another reason so it's shallow, and we have this angled coast that just piles water in this area. So there are reasons why we're very vulnerable here to saltwater flooding. Finally, just wanted to wrap up with pre-landfall intensity and size. So the intensity of the storm before it hits coast also has something to do with this. So next I wanted to get into just the rise of flood information systems. And basically what I've been doing in recent years is not only looking at hurricane history and saltwater history, but look at this next slide. This is a picture of Galveston Island. So I lived in Galveston a few years, and you can see the difference in home elevation. So even if we knew that there's going to be 3 feet of water over the landscape, different elevations of homes will, shows that there's a different risk as far as inundation. This next slide here shows, trying to get this first floor elevation. That's something that we've been working on for a few years. Stuart and I and Carl and I work on some projects like this. We're interested to build an inventory of first floor elevations for communities. This next slide shows a project that we did in Galveston, Texas, where you can actually select the type of storm. We did the 100-year storm here in 2050 with intermediate sea level rise, and we can mouse over any building and it'll tell you how much water would be in that building. We can aggregate it for a community. It says 64% of the buildings would have salt water inside them from a 100-year flood. And this next slide here shows Norfolk, Virginia. We just did first floor elevations and compared it to this base flood elevation that we're supposed to build to. Everything in blue is not built to that level. These older homes that were grandfathered in, 33% of them are not at that level that is considered the base flood elevation. So these are projects that we can do with communities, working alongside them. Finally, one more map shows where we're going with this. We could take a community. This next slide shows we could actually have water levels that we estimate were in homes during a storm. And then finally, we call this flood information systems. We're interested to tie a lot of information into any one home. So what's the elevation of the home? Does it have an elevation certificate? How is it constructed? What kind of roof does it have? What kind of walls does it have? What's the chance of flooding with 30-year mortgage? Have there been previous floods? These are the kind of things that we want to build into a flood information system. We just put in a grant with the City of Biloxi to actually build an information system like this for Biloxi, and we're hoping that we can get it. I mentioned up here the fortified wind, yes and no. How many of you are familiar with the fortified project? Have you heard of this before? So Carl Schneider's here. He's really headed up that project in Alabama, and really it's a standard to build better so that people are better prepared and that their homes are better constructed for wind, and we're hoping for flood as well. I wanted to wrap up with just a few more seconds. Stuart and I were just up in Washington, D.C. for the National Flood Conference, and we're really excited about the fortified project that Carl's doing. I walked into this ballroom at this conference in Washington, D.C., and there were hundreds of people there. I heard 3 conversations right off the bat where people were talking about fortified. I couldn't believe it. I went up to this one group. I was listening in, and I said, "Are you talking about Alabama fortified?" And this big guy, I think he was from South Carolina, he said, "Alabama fortified?" He said, "Son, I'm not talking about fortified." He said, "We're going to grab some beers from 4 to 5. So I'm sorry, Carl. Carl, I got all excited. We're not quite there yet, but people are excited about your project. So anyway, thanks so much for having me here today. My contact information is on this last slide here, but we're excited to work with communities along the Gulf Coast, build that flood history, build that inventory of first floor elevation so we can kind of understand the flood risk and the impacts of it economically and across the city as a whole. This is my contact information, and I'll be here after the event if we have some time for questions. So thank you so much for the invite to be here.
Thank you so much, Doctor. That was a wealth of information and very interesting data. Now I want to welcome up Rupert Lacey and Matt Stratton. They're with Harrison County Emergency Management Agency. They're going to talk about the 2018 hurricane season, hurricane threat, watches and warnings, personal preparedness, evacuation, sheltering, and the 2019 season forecast. Welcome.
Thank you. Of course, it's our pleasure to be here in Biloxi for the Are You Ready campaign. Of course, the season's already started. I want to thank the hurricane hunters, of course, for not flying 91L, but it has helped us in the preparedness message this week is that system did roll over. Hopefully it's out of here today, and we get ready. 2018 was a very unique season. Remember that we saw 2 storms hit the mainland U.S. of A., one on our east coast in South Carolina, North Carolina. My understanding, Florence has been retired as a name now. And then we think about Hurricane Michael. I look at a lot of you in this room. We were talking about that in October of last year. It was a very quick spin-up storm. It was one that took our plans off the shelf, and we had within 72 hours to prepare, and we did a couple of historical things here on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We shut the casinos down, and 24 hours later we opened the casinos back up, and we were spared that Category 5 storm that impacted Bay County, of course, City of Mexico Beach, and we're sorry for their loss and the devastation that they're going through. But it did remind us of the 2005 year and or the 1969 year. If that storm would have come in here, what would we be doing today? Probably not really talking about this, but we'd be doing a little bit more cleanup and rebuilding again. Of course, take each hurricane season very heavily. What we want to encourage is, one, you prepare. And the message that we really want to kind of push this morning before we get into the 2019 season is, are you prepared personally? And when we say this, do you have that go kit? Are you ready to go? I look at the responders in here, and that message is 48 hours prior to landfall, every responder in here is already engaged at work. Is that we've gone to those, unfortunately, 12-hour shifts, if not 24-hour shifts, and we are trying to prepare the residents for what is about to happen to the Mississippi Gulf Coast. That water level is our big concern as we stand here on the island of the big island of Harrison County. We want you to remember that we have water all the way around us. You know, as I've said, and as the history will show, the Bay of St. Louis does meet the Bay of Biloxi once you go back into the waterways through the Big Lake and get into the Industrial Canal, which is developed in there. That gets into the Flat Branch and the Turkey Creek River, which goes over to Long Beach into Canal 1 and 2. Those actually are little creeks. That comes back to Biopotash, which goes into the Bay of St. Louis. So you are on the Big Island. It is like Gulf Shores. It is like our neighbors to the east. And what we want you to do is to prepare and get ready to get off the Big Island when we start looking at those high surge values. That the Weather Service, the Hurricane Center, has really started to hone in on us as to what the values are. You know, we don't want to see the fire department riding it out on a station in East Biloxi on the top of the engine. Then that engine is not functional, and it's got to be replaced, and then that knocks the service down once we get to the sunshine, to the wind stop blowing, and we have to get back out and start rescuing our citizens and or our responders and those people that chose not to take the preparedness. Now, of course, the good part is that I'm fortunate to have a deputy director that also is a meteorologist. Now, of course, that's his profession by trade since he's retired on me, but I'm going to let him be the bearer of bad news about talking about the 2019 hurricane season. So, Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, sir, and I'll try to keep the news not too bad. If we could flip to the next slide. Couple of topics we're going to be covering today: the threat, our own personal preparedness, last season in a little more detail, as Rupert has already got that going. Revisit watches and warnings, make sure everybody understands what we're talking about there, and then a couple of topics as far as protective actions are concerned, our evacuations and sheltering, and then finish up with the outlook for this 2019 season. Next slide, please. So the hurricane threat is very real for our communities. It's happened before. It will likely happen again. And so as the tropical areas grow and develop and move towards us, those steering currents do track systems from the Caribbean and the Gulf in towards us. It is a eye-opening chart to see there on the right-hand side all of the systems that have landfalled along the Gulf Coast. And as those systems come in, as was mentioned earlier, the storm surge is a definite threat for our area. But that's not the only hazard associated with these storms. We also see the damaging winds, both the force they exert and the things that they pick up and throw as projectiles. We have the inland flooding. As we had Mother's Day weekend several weeks ago, all that water falling as rain has to go somewhere. And as it falls, it fills the low-lying areas and then comes downstream towards the coast. And then tornadoes, another threat, especially on that right front quadrant of the storm. We need to be prepared for all of these hazards associated with the hurricanes. Next slide, please. And preparedness means for ourselves, our families, and our workplaces. On the left-hand side there are some suggestions for things you can do to prepare your homes. At the station in the back, we have checklists that you can take with you that have all of these items and more. You're going to want to have your emergency supplies ready after you've got your home prepared. So make sure you've got those 5 days of food and water per person, and you have all those supplies that are going to get you through until stores are opened again or resupply stations are set up. And whether you're staying here locally or you are evacuating, you definitely want to have your go bag ready. Change of clothes, your cell phone chargers, your hygiene items, and at least 2 weeks of medication you want to take with you, as well as your important documents to help you recover afterwards. You don't want to be losing your birth certificates, your other important documents. Make sure those go with you in your go bags. Next slide, please. So last season, as Rupert mentioned, was very active. We saw numbers of storms above what is average. If you look out over 100 years, the average number of storms is 12 named storms, 6 hurricanes, and 3 of those hurricanes being major hurricanes. Last season, we had 15 named storms, 8 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. And 3 of those named storms were very close to us here: Alberto, Gordon, and Michael. And if the steering currents had just been a little bit different, any one of those 3 could have been right here on our doorstep. Last season being an active season, as these storms do progress in towards us, the weather professionals at the National Hurricane Center, National Weather Service in Slidell, and our NOAA partners are going to be getting the information out to us. Next slide, please. With watches and warnings. So just to make sure everybody is aware, the watch is letting the community know that it is possible those conditions are going to happen. And so 48 hours prior, we'll start seeing either a tropical storm watch or a hurricane watch that is put out. And you're going to be getting those over your NOAA weather radios. You'll be seeing it, of course, on television, radio, and other media. And, of course, everybody loves their cell phones. You will be getting alerts through your cell phones as well. And you don't have to sign up for wireless emergency alerts. The National Weather Service, through the notification systems, is going to send that directly to phones through the cell towers of affected areas. And so those will pop up into your phones. Just make sure you've got WEAs turned on in your settings on your cell phone. But the watch is letting people know that it is possible. It is now time to start taking those protective actions. And as the system moves closer, once we get to the 36-hour point, those watches will then be upgraded to warnings. At that point, we are expecting those conditions. And the last several years, the hurricane forecasters have gotten very, very good at predicting where these storms are going. So once it gets upgraded to the warning, you can pretty much bet that we are going to be seeing those conditions. Expect them to occur. Now, the last couple of years, because of the threat that storm surge does pose, the Weather Service has started putting out specifically a storm surge watch and a storm surge warning. And so for areas that are expecting those conditions, look for the storm surge watch and the storm surge warning to be put out. Next slide, please. Okay, so once the watches and the warnings are put out, we're going to be taking those protective actions. And evacuations are a great tool that we have in our toolkit. Everybody needs to understand what their evacuation zone is, though. We have two in Harrison County. You see those represented in the red and the yellow areas. And so make sure you understand where your home is, where it lies in an evacuation zone, where your workplace is, and make sure that everybody understands what their specific risk is associated with those zones. If an evacuation is ordered, we ask for everybody's cooperation in please following those evacuation orders. It is a serious thing if an evacuation is ordered, and people need to follow the guidance that is issued. Our evacuation maps are available at the table in the back, and those are produced by our partners at MDOT, showing you the safe routes out and away to safe locations. And as you're traveling along, you want to make sure that you're taking your go bags with you as well. Pets, if you do have a pet and you're taking your pet with you, try to remember to bring that crate along with you. There is a lot of hotels, a lot of shelters that are pet friendly now, and so it just makes things a little bit easier when you arrive to those locations if you have a crate and some food for your pets as well. And as you're traveling, of course, monitor the conditions as they are evolving, and keep track of the situation through local radio and media as well. Next slide, please. When you do get to that safe location, the sheltering is it's a challenging thing for any community, whether they are here in our local area or further away. But we ask that residents in those evacuation zones get to a safe location. The best case situation is going to family or friends inland, and if that's not an option for you, a hotel or a motel, but understand that a lot of people are going to be competing for these same hotels and motels. Regardless, you need to get to a sturdy building away from the coasts, the rivers, and the creeks. It is the water, rising water, that is the primary killer, and you need to get to a sturdy building away from those rivers, coasts, and creeks. Emergency shelters are a last resort. It is a temporary place to go away from the wind and the water. It's going to be safe, but likely not what you would call comfortable. And so if at all possible, we would recommend going to family and friends or to hotels and motels inland. The shelters will be a last resort. Next slide, please. So looking ahead to the upcoming season, 2019 looks to be an active season. And both the weather forecasters at NOAA and Colorado State, many other partners, they're telling us that all of their predictions are that it's going to be a near normal season. So for us, the information for us is to expect that active season and to take this time now to prepare, to set yourself up for success when we do have any system that potentially moves into our area. There's no way to know at this point in time where those storms are going to go, but we do know that it has happened before, it will happen again, and we need to be prepared for that. Next slide, please. You don't have to wait until the watch or the warning to be put out to start taking your actions. The National Weather Service, NOAA Hurricane Center, does put out a 5-day tropical outlook, and we really recommend you check this regularly throughout hurricane season. They will mark the areas that are potentially able to develop, and they'll give it a percentage, a low, medium, high chance of development. And this will give you 5 days looking out into the future to help you plan and prepare. So I really recommend people monitor this regularly from the National Hurricane Center. You just go to hurricanes.gov and it'll be right there for you. Next slide, please. Okay, so that is the recap of last season, looking ahead to this season, and our recommendations on how you can prepare now that we have entered hurricane season. But I'll be happy to take any questions now or at the end after we wrap things up. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Rupert Lacey and Matt Stratton, for that information. Now I'm going to welcome up Archie Reeves with Mississippi Power. He's going to talk about generator and power line safety.
Thank you. How's everybody doing today? Good. My name is Archie Reeves. I work for Mississippi Power Company. I'll give you a little history of what happens before the storm gets here. Once we determine that our service territory is going to be affected by a storm, what we do is we start getting on the phone and we start bringing other utilities in and help in to get as close as they can get in and still be safe. Safety is our number one concern. And once the storm gets here and passes through, then we go ahead and we start bringing them in, and we immediately start doing assessments. Our assessments are for damages that we have and what we will need, how many people we will need to get everybody's lights back on as quickly as possible. But the main thing that we want everybody to be aware of is safety. So the things that we ask the public, everybody do not do, don't go around any down power lines. It doesn't matter what type of line it is. If it's a telephone line, TV cable, power line, we don't want you around them until they can be repaired. One of the things that we're very concerned with is generators. Generators, improperly installed generators can backfeed out on the power lines, and those lines will be sitting there energized on the ground. So one of the things we ask that you do is to follow your instructions, your generator safety instructions. Do not try to backfeed them, like take a generator and plug it into a wall receptacle and then backfeed through the house, because that way it can get back out onto the system. You need a properly installed switch that separates the generator from the power company. Another safety hazard involved with generators is people fear that, my house is on generator. I'm afraid somebody's going to come up in the middle of the night and steal my generator. So they'll put their generators on carports. They'll put their generators up close to a house. What you don't want happening is carbon monoxide poisoning from a generator. Unfortunately, every now and then you hear where the family's been injured and or worse in the event that carbon monoxide has gotten back up into the house where they're sleeping at night. In our restoration process, if your lights go out, certainly we want you to contact us and tell us. And if you don't need to call us every day. We know, but actually if you want to, we have an application or a website that you can actually go out on and look, and you can see the areas that we've restored. We update every so many hours during the hurricane season or during a storm as to who's back in lights, who's not. And so it kind of gives you an idea of when your light's going to be restored. We're going to try to get them restored as fast as possible. Hurricane Katrina is our landmark, and it took us 11 days to get the lights back on for everybody in Hurricane Katrina that could take them. So our goal is to get everybody healed. Getting power back is part of the healing process. So we want to do that, but we want to do it safely, and we want you all to remain safe as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Archie Reeves, for that information. Now I want to welcome up Casey Harrison with the Humane Society of South Mississippi to talk about pet preparedness.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Casey Harrison. I'm the Director of Animal Services at the Humane Society of South Mississippi. I just want to go over a few key points with you today for being prepared to evacuate with your pets. You should always make sure that you have your current animal vaccination records with you. Rabies vaccinations are extremely important. If your pet is microchipped, make sure that your information is current and up to date. If your pet is not microchipped, we offer that at the shelter any time of year. Right now we actually have a vaccination and microchip package that we do during hurricane season, where you can come in and get your pet microchipped and a rabies vaccination for $20. You'll just come into our spay and neuter clinic. You do not have to have an appointment to come in for that. So if you have friends or family who would need to have any of those procedures done, please pass the word along to them. Please also make sure that you have a crate to travel for your pet. Hotel rooms would like for you to have a crate for your pet. If you're going to evacuate, make sure that you're calling your hotels that you're going to make sure that they allow pets. Any evacuation shelters that you're going to make sure that they also allow pets to be brought with you to those as well. Make sure that you have enough food, water to transport with your animal, because you don't know how far away you're going to have to go, and you don't know how long it's going to be before you can get back to where you might be able to purchase food for your animal. Also, make sure that you have toys, any kind of toys, squeaky toys, rope toys, something that's going to keep them occupied while you're away, raw hides, anything that will keep them occupied for long periods of time. Make sure that you have your evacuation route planned for you and your pet. Make sure that you have proper ID for your pet. You can do little pet ID cards. Make sure you also have up-to-date photographs of your pet in case your pet was to escape or get away from you in transport. And I think that is about it. So, thank you.
And thank you, Casey, for that information. Now I want to welcome up Bobby Carson. He's a City of Biloxi engineer, and he is going to talk about storm debris removal.
Biloxi Engineering Department. My name is Bobby Carson. I was asked to talk about storm debris removal. If it's a small storm, our public works is able to come in there, and they're capable of moving all the debris that needs to be removed to clear our streets out. If it's a larger storm, the city has a contract with a company that will come in, and they have a lot of manpower. They've got a lot of trucks and vehicles to be able to do the removal themselves. They have in the contract, they have up to 70 hours to be here to start that removal. In the past, they've been much quicker than 70 hours, but they have up to that time. It's important to move the debris from the streets. You need your buses and your fire and your police, your AMR, utility companies. I mean, if they don't have access from point A to point B, nothing happens. After they remove the debris from the streets, they'll go back and they'll make several passes through the neighborhoods and individual streets to remove debris from private residents. They will make at least 2 passes. If it's a large storm, they'll make 3. So if you have your stuff out, if you see that your neighbor's stuff got picked up and you hadn't put it out yet, don't freak out. They'll come back a second time. There is a few things that we ask to make the effort more efficient. To put the debris next to the curb, but not in the street. Don't block the streets that we just cleared. You got 10 foot. You can put it up to 10 foot past the curb onto your property, and they'll be able to remove the debris off your property then. There's several categories. I think there's 6 categories that they ask that you have separate piles. One's for electronics, one's for large appliances and just vegetation and house garbage. If you could put them in different piles, for some reason it helps them out. So I say we do that if that's what they need. And last thing, we ask that y'all don't put the debris next to fire hydrants, over your water meters, next to mailbox or tree stumps. It slows the process down, and that's not good for anybody. So if they can get in and get out, the quicker they can do that, the quicker we can get to Walmart and get back to work. So if you have any questions, ask me. I'll be in the back of the room, and y'all can pass that one around. Thank you.
And thank you, Bobby, for that information. Now I want to welcome up Kevin Coggin with the Coast Transit Authority. He's going to talk about transportation to a shelter.
Good morning. How are you all? Great to see you. I'm Kevin Coggin, Director of Coast Transit Authority. We've been through quite a few of these. I'm a native of Biloxi, lifelong resident of the coast, so I've been through Camille and Katrina, and I'm trying to make it another 4.5 years to retire before we have another one. So I got my fingers crossed. Let these younger folks take. You see all this gray hair? So I'm going to talk about before a storm and after a storm. There's two things we do. And the easiest thing we do, we've learned, is evacuation, because that's a short-term operation. So we're part of the Harrison County Emergency Management Agency. We manage the transportation component. We're actually in the Emergency Operations Center. When Rupert and his staff open the Emergency Operations Center, we're there. We have somebody there. I'm there. He has a great staff. He does a great job. They're very experienced. When we're under a hurricane warning, Rupert Lacey is the boss of Harrison County, basically. I'm really proud of the job they do. So all the resources that the community needs are at his disposal. So if our citizens need something, it's going to get done, and we're going to work together. I want to assure you of that. So our role to play before a hurricane is getting you to a shelter of last resort. That's key. We want you to leave. We want you to have a plan. But if you can't leave, we don't want anybody to be left in harm's way because they don't have transportation. That's where we come in. We provide curb-to-curb transportation to a shelter only, shelter of last resort. There'll be 4 or 5 shelters or more that'll open. That's Rupert's call, depending on the severity of the storm. All the information goes through his office, his agency. Watch the news. His public information officer will shove that out. I'll work directly with Rupert. We'll establish a 2 or 3 time frame that we will pick up members of the community and take them to a shelter of last resort. We have a registration system, a pre-registration system. I highly encourage the community to take advantage of that. It helps me let us know, my organization, what kind of resources we need ahead of a time, and we know where you are, and you have already told us you need help. We put you in our database, and we actually have an automated call-out system where our system will call you with a message, and it'll say something like, Harrison County Emergency Management Agency has ordered an evacuation of your zone. Call Coast Transit Authority now to arrange your ride. You don't have to be registered. You can call, but it makes our job easier. We have a 2 or 3 hour window of opportunity to get everybody in all of Harrison County to a shelter. What we do, the amount of service we do, depends on the severity of the storm. We all know that. If it's a low-level storm, people are not going to evacuate. If it's a Cat 5, we're all going to get scared, right, including me, and evacuate. So after the storm, we're going to get you back where you need to be. If we have a devastating event like a Camille or Katrina, we're going to be working with the Emergency Management Agency, and we're going to establish what kind of service does Coast Transit, your public transit agency, need to be doing to help the community get back on their feet. Where are the FEMA help places at? If you lost your house, where are the shelters people are going to live at? Where are the points of distribution? So we're going to know all that, and we're going to provide transportation to help the community get to help the community get back on their feet. After Hurricane Katrina, we ran free public transportation service for 3 months to help our community get back on their feet. We had people lost their homes, lost their cars, so whatever we need to do to help you, that's what we're going to be doing. So watch your TV, watch your media. Rupert All of the information comes out of Rupert. He makes the calls. We just do whatever he needs us to do. And we all work together, all of the responders, and we're all experienced people. And so we've been through this before. And we don't do tabletop drills at Coast Transit Authority because we have enough storms. You know, every 2 or 3 years we're actually doing an evacuation, so it keeps us sharp. So I'll be around, and Susan will be around. We have a table here that has more information about what we do and how we do it. So if you need us, we're going to be here for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin Coggin, for that information. Now I want to welcome our last speaker for this event. It is John McFarland with the American Red Cross, and he's going to talk about Red Cross preparedness.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. A couple of points up front. Hurricanes obviously are very scary, very deadly. You got to take them seriously. But if you have to be in a hurricane area, this is the best place to be because we have the most experienced and the most prepared emergency management organization around here. As Kevin mentioned, he's been doing this a long time. I've been with Red Cross as a volunteer or now as an executive director for 45 years. Rupert's been doing this forever. We know what we're doing, and we practice constantly. And there's a plan for everything. And if you just follow the plan, you'll get through this okay. It's not like this everywhere. A lot of places around the country, including a lot of places around Mississippi, they wait for the disaster to happen and then try to figure out where do we go from here. But here we've got a plan. And I would urge you, especially now, that when a storm comes, because it will, whether it's this year or next year, it's going to come, follow the official information. You'll get alerts from the emergency management. We will be contacting and keeping the news media up to date constantly. Follow that information because radio stations are going to be having open mics, letting people call in, and you're going to hear all kind of rumors and all kind of gossip. And I promise you, as good as it sounds, 95% of it is wrong. And it causes people to follow instructions that only get them into more trouble or create more problems for them. And with social media, you're going to see Facebook and YouTube and everything else just full of information, and 99% of that's going to be wrong. So just follow the basic instructions. What I want to talk about very quickly, and I've got plenty of literature outside just like everybody else, so if you want to know when we talk about having a kit and making it ready, what should be in that kit, it's in there. What to do in preparing for the storms, it's all there. Or you can download the free Red Cross apps, and again, they will alert you and they will remind you that you should be doing this, that, or whatever at this time. But whether we have a storm or not, today is the time to start the easy planning. For example, every time you go to the grocery store, buy an extra 8-pack of bottled water and bring it home and just store it someplace. When you go to the grocery store or to Walmart, buy an extra pack of crackers or the little cookies or the snack things that you can use that you don't have to need electricity for, and just set it aside. And just every time you go, just get a little bit of something extra and have it. If you don't use it, for the holidays when your guests come, you can feed them water and the cookies that you've been collecting all year long. Make sure, as was mentioned earlier, now check your insurance. Grab your birth certificate, grab your prescriptions, forms, all of those papers that are probably scattered all over your house. Put them all together in one place, preferably in one bag, so you know where it is. So that if you have to evacuate, you don't have to start thinking, geez, what do I need to take with me? It's all right there. Okay? Now's the time to start thinking, what would I do if I have to evacuate? If we opened I think there are 42 shelters in the lower 6 counties, Rupert. If we opened every shelter, and that won't happen, but if we opened every shelter, the maximum capacity is about 14,000 people. And there are 420,000 of us in the lower 6. Plus you got 500,000 people in South Louisiana who would have to evacuate. So as Kevin and I think everyone else has said, especially if we're looking at a bad storm, get out. Now's the time to start making up with your in-laws upstate so that you can call them and say, look, we got a storm coming. Can we come and stay a couple of days with you? Now's the time, as someone mentioned earlier, especially if you have pets. Now's the time to start calling, if you don't have a family or some other place to go, to just start calling a couple of the hotels and motels in upstate Mississippi to find out, will you take pets, so that you have a couple of them and you have their phone numbers. And so then again, as the storm starts coming in, you know who to call and you know where to go. Those kind of things you can do now, okay? Now, quickly about what the Red Cross will do. In the event of a storm, the county emergency manager, Rupert or Matt, will decide which shelters will be open. They're the ones that make that call. When they do, then our responsibility is to staff them. So you will have a safe place to go for a storm. Preferably, you're gone. But if you have to be here, we will have shelters open, and they will be a safe place for you to go. After the storm, many of those shelters will become residential or post-storm shelters. We'll have cots. We'll have 3 meals a day. 2 of them will be hot meals and snacks for breakfast. And we will keep those shelters open as long as people need them. Now, there is not going to be a 1-week thing while the news cameras are here. We will be here until Rupert says we don't need them anymore. And they will be staffed and you will be fed. We will also be using our ERVs, the emergency response vehicles. These big things look like giant ambulances. We'll be going through the neighborhoods 3 times a day and providing food and water to people who are at home, either rode it out safely at home or have already returned home. Now, the first couple of days, while the streets are still littered with debris, don't expect lunch at noon sharp or dinner at 5:30, because depending upon where you are, your lunch may come at 10, it might come at 2, but it'll come, because the debris will be slowing us down. And generally what we'll do with the ERVs while the streets are covered with debris is go as far down the street as we possibly can, stop, and all of our ERVs have a big horn on it, a big siren, and they'll blow the siren and let people know we're there so you can come and get it. You don't have to bring identification to prove that there are 4 of you in the house. We take your word for it. So if you're hungry and you want an extra one, just come and tell us, I need 6 dinners or I need 6 or whatever. You'll get what you need. So we will house you, shelter you, we will feed you. We will also have people going through the neighborhoods with emergency supplies. Things like tarps and bleach and masks, mold masks or bug masks, bug spray, comfort kits. Comfort kits have personal hygiene items in them, toothbrush, toothpaste, a washcloth, soap, things like that. And cleanup kits. And the cleanup kits will have a mop and a broom and a number of solvents that can be used to clean things out. So we'll be doing that. And again, that will go on for some time. And then we will also be providing casework. Caseworkers will be working with individual families to see what other assistance that you need, and a lot of it will be referring you to other agencies, but also we will be providing emergency financial assistance to people that need it. Now that will usually come a couple of weeks after the storm, because before we start shelling out money, we do a damage assessment. We ride every street, we look at every house, and we capture information about the extent of damage to that house. So when you come to us and tell us that you live at 123 Maple, we'll hit the computer, we'll have a picture, and we'll have a description of exactly what the damage is, so we have a better idea of how to serve you. I want to close by just a couple of mentions. One is, talked about pets. Please, if you bring pets to the shelter, bring them in a cage. There are laws health laws, that require us to separate animals from people in a shelter, and sometimes for obvious reasons. But also, that little Chihuahua, who's the sweetest thing in the world, and you know everybody loves them, will drive the other 300 people crazy in that shelter. So we separate the animals from the people in the shelter, and that's why we want them in a cage. A lot of places around the country and a lot of places in Mississippi, the Humane Society will staff a shelter, and they'll take care of them. We don't have that going on down here right now. So if you have to bring the pets, bring them, but please, please, please have them in a cage. The other thing I want to mention about shelters themselves, there are 2 kinds of shelters. There's the evacuation shelter. Sometimes they're called the safe room. That's the place you're going to go when the hurricane warning comes and it's just time to get out of the area. We don't set up cots in those evacuation shelters for this reason. The Americans for Disability Act requires, federal law, and since we are a nonprofit agency, but we operate under a congressional charter when it comes to disaster release. We have to follow the laws. And federal law requires, it used to require 40 square feet around a cot. Now I think it's been moved to 60 feet. I think they just adjusted it to 60. So that people who have handicaps or in a wheelchair or whatever can move around them. Well, when you need that much room for a cot, there's not enough room for people. For example, I think the closest shelter around here that would be open would be D'Iberville High School. That's your call, and I'm not going to tell you that's what's going to happen, but that's usually the one that's open first. All of the shelters, the evacuation shelters, are north of the interstate. The last thing the Rupert wants to do, and certainly the last thing we want to do, is put you in a shelter that's going to get blown away by hurricane force winds, or is located on a street that floods in a storm, so that emergency services people can't get to you in the shelter if something happens. So the closest one for you will probably be D'Iberville High School. It is rated had to have a capacity of 1,025 people for evacuations. That's cramming them in, but that would be a safe place because it is a very reinforced building. But if we put cots out, we would only be able to fit about 100 people. So we don't put the cots out for the evacuation shelters, for the evacuation. We ask you to keep in mind you're not going to be there long. You're just going to be there till the storm blows through. So bring a pillow or bring something to sit on. You want to bring folding chairs, bring those in. There will be some chairs in the shelter. We do keep some cots in every shelter, so there's always going to be somebody that has to have a place to lie down, and we'll pull a cot out for them. But don't expect to go to the evacuation shelter and have your own cot for that reason. Now, once the storm blows through and people are allowed to go back home, Rupert gives them the all clear and they can go home, check on their property or whatever, we immediately turn those shelters into more of a residential shelter. That's where the cots come out, where everybody will have a cot, where everybody will have 3 meals a day in the shelter, and they will be able to stay there for as long as they need to. We will also have health and mental health health and mental health workers in the shelters. They'll either be staying in there or they'll be visiting the shelter. These are professional nurses, doctors, mental health professionals who donate their time to the Red Cross after disasters. So if you have an issue and you need some first aid or some medical care or something very quickly, there'll be somebody there to help you, or they can get on the phone and call them. In fact, even the IRVs that are delivering food through the neighborhoods will usually have a nurse on several of them, or they can get on the phone and quickly call one. And then we'll also have the caseworkers there. So pre-storm, when you get the order to evacuate, smartest thing to do is get out. But if you have to stay, there will be shelters available. Listen to the official information about which shelters will be open, because they're not going to open every one for a lot of reasons. Some of them is depending upon which way the wind's going and the water's going. I mean, they're for safety reasons. And so don't listen to your friend and say, oh, I always go over to old Biloxi High School, because you can go there, but it won't be a shelter. So just listen to the official information. Prepare to just ride out the storm and bring something to sit on, bring a blanket or whatever else you need. There will be snacks. There will be water, there will be coffee, there will be soft drinks in there, but we don't put cots out for everybody for the reason I just mentioned. The law requires all that space around them, and there wouldn't be enough room for people. Once you leave, once the storm has passed through, and for those people that need long-term things, yes, there'll be cots, blankets, be changed regularly, and we try to make it as comfortable as possible. It's not a hotel, but we try to make it as comfortable as possible. I think that's it. Anybody have any questions? If not, let's hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John, for that information. And this concludes our speaking portion of the event. I, Cecilia Dawes-Walton, on behalf of the City of Biloxi, all of our first responders, and all the officials that were here today, want to thank all of y'all for coming out to this event. Please make sure that you're prepared. Sign up for necessary needs that are available. And don't forget to sign up for Be Alert. It's the City of Biloxi's messaging system where we send traffic advisory and weather advisories to your cell phone. all you have to do is text BILOXI to 888-777. That's Biloxi to 888-777. Again, thank you very much.